My hands shook as I looked at the photograph on my phone screen. June 14th, 10:47 p.m. That's when I sent it. Just one image. No caption. No explanation. No angry message or bitter words. Just a picture, and then I watched over the next 6 hours as everything my family had built collapsed like a house made of cards. By the morning, my brother wasn't answering his phone. My mother had deleted her Instagram. My father's business partner was calling emergency meetings. The local news was knocking on their door. And I was sitting alone in my apartment, perfectly calm, drinking my morning coffee, watching it all unfold like I was an audience member at a film I'd already memorized every frame of. That one photo did what 2 years of planning, crying, and silence could never do. It set me free. But this didn't start with revenge. It started with a promise I thought would last forever. My name is Sarah, and for the first 22 years of my life, I was the kind of person who believed in things. I believed in family. I believed that loyalty meant something. I believed that if you worked hard enough, stayed honest, and showed up for the people who mattered, they would show up for you too. Stupid, I know, but I wasn't always smart about how the world actually works. I grew up in a suburban neighborhood in Connecticut, not wealthy, but comfortable. My father, Michael, ran a small accounting firm out of an office downtown. Nothing glamorous, but he was good at what he did, and he made enough money that my mother could stay home with us, that we could take one vacation every summer, that I could go to college without crushing debt. My brother, David, is 3 years older than me. 3 years older, and somehow he existed in a completely different universe in the same house. Our parents treated him like he was made of glass, expensive, rare glass that needed constant polishing. He was the golden child, not in a funny, exaggerated way, actually in the way that slowly breaks you down as the other child in the house. David played soccer. He was good, not great, good. But you would have thought he was Pelé the way my mother sat in the bleachers with her camera, the way my father talked about his athleticism at dinner. When David got into state university with a partial soccer scholarship, my parents threw a party, not a small thing. They hired a catering company, invited relatives we hadn't seen in years. When I was 7, I won first place in the school science fair. My project was about how plants grow differently under different colored lights. I'd spent 3 weeks on it, watering those seeds, measuring every single day, writing down observations in a notebook with my careful handwriting. My mother brought me to school that morning and smiled, and I remember feeling like my chest was going to explode with happiness because I finally had something they'd be proud of. That evening, we all went to dinner. My parents, my brother, me. David had scored a hat trick at his soccer game that same day. Guess whose achievement my father talked about for 45 minutes straight. I still remember the exact taste of my pasta that night, cold, even though I knew the restaurant had just made it. But this is the thing about families. They do these small things to you so gradually that you almost don't notice them happening. The math of it. How many times do you have to be overlooked before you start expecting it? Before your own accomplishments begin to feel like they're happening to someone else? My mother was a good woman. I truly believe that. She loved us, but she loved David the way you love something fragile. She loved me the way you love something sturdy, something that didn't require as much attention. I became the responsible one, the one who didn't make waves, the one who got good grades because I actually wanted to learn, not because I needed anyone to notice. The one who worked part-time at a coffee shop all through high school to save money for college. The one who didn't ask for much. And David, David loved being loved, but he was also kind of lost without it. In high school, he started drinking at parties. Nothing was said about it at home. My mother made excuses. Boys his age, she'd whisper to her friends on the phone, like it was a phase, like it was charming. He failed 2 classes junior year. My father hired him a private tutor. The tutor was expensive. I knew because my parents had told me in careful tones that college funds were stretched thin, and that I'd probably need to look at state schools if I wanted to keep costs down. But David's tutor was not an issue. David's tutor was an investment. By the time I was applying to colleges, I'd already made peace with it. This was just how things were. This was my family, and I loved them anyway. I got into several good schools. Good, not great. I wasn't trying to be great. I was trying to be invisible because visibility in my family meant comparison, and comparison meant losing. I chose to attend university in Boston, close enough to visit home, far enough that I could have my own life. I wanted to study forensic science, always had, since I was that kid with the plants and the notebook. There was something about evidence, about proof, about truth that could be documented and studied. It appealed to me. My parents drove me to campus on a gray September afternoon. We hauled my boxes into the dorm, and my mother cried a little, and my father took photos. It felt like a real goodbye, the kind that mattered. On the drive home, my mother texted me, "So proud of you, sweetheart, make us proud." But I kept that text, because later I would need to remember that she once thought I deserved to be proud of myself. College was better, not perfect, when is anything, but better. I joined a study group. I made real friends, people who cared about my thoughts, who asked me questions and actually listened to the answers. I worked at the university library 3 days a week. I maintained a 3.8 GPA. I didn't do these things to prove anything to anyone. I just did them because I wanted to know who I was when no one was watching. By senior year, I'd developed a kind of quiet confidence. It wasn't arrogance. It was just peace. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. My graduation was scheduled for May 28th, Saturday morning. I sent my parents the details in March. The time, the location, what I'd be wearing under the gown, which relatives I'd invited. My father confirmed that they would be there. But confirmation, I was learning, didn't mean the same thing to everyone. The first time I called my mother about graduation details was in April. "Hi, honey," she said. She was in the car. I could hear the turn signal clicking. "How are you?" "Good," I said. "I wanted to just triple-check about the ceremony. Can you send me a photo of my invitation so I can see what time you need to arrive?" There was a pause, a small one, not long enough to mean anything then. "Oh, we'll definitely be there," she said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." I remember smiling when she said that, like I'd been carrying something heavy without knowing it, and she'd just put it down. In May, my friend Rachel threw me a small graduation party at her apartment. Just our study group, cheap pizza, someone's brother's friends who came and went. My parents sent a flower arrangement with a card that said, "So proud of you," with 3 exclamation points. My mother's handwriting was neat and careful. She'd probably bought the arrangement from a store, but it was there. The week before graduation, I called my father. "Dad, just confirming. You're leaving Thursday evening, right? That way you can settle into the hotel before the ceremony." My father was a quiet man. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. There was a gravity to him. "Sarah, yeah, we'll be there. You've sent us everything we need." "Okay, great. I'm really looking forward to it." There was a small sound on the phone, him setting something down. "Your mother's been so excited. She bought a new dress." That detail, the dress, that's the one that killed me, because it meant she'd really been thinking about it. It wasn't just words. It was planning, it was intention. The night before graduation, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my dorm room. I was leaving it the next day, moving back home before I started my internship at the Massachusetts State Police Forensic Lab, and I thought about my parents seeing me in my cap and gown. I thought about my mother maybe crying. I thought about my father's face when I walked across the stage. I thought about all the moments in my childhood when I'd felt less than, and how this moment was supposed to be different. How this was supposed to be the moment when my own achievement was enough. When they chose to be there for me, not because they had to, but because they wanted to witness something I'd built. I didn't sleep. But I wasn't worried. I was calm. The next morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. I showered. I did my hair and makeup carefully. I put on the dress I'd bought for after the ceremony. I checked my phone. 7:14 a.m. A text from my mother. Good morning, baby. So excited for today. Don't forget to hydrate, smiling face with smiling eyes. 8:33 a.m. Another one. David says congratulations. That's when I felt something shift. Something very small, like a door closing somewhere in a house I wasn't in. But I ignored it. I got ready. I met my friends. I lined up with the other graduates, and I kept checking my phone. 8:45 a.m. Nothing. 8:52 a.m. Nothing. 9:10 a.m. The ceremony started. My hands were steady. I was smiling. We were told to turn off our phones. The program lasted an hour and 40 minutes. I walked across the stage. Someone took a photo. I got my diploma. It all happened like it was supposed to. When it was finished, I turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls. From my mother. 9:15 a.m., 9:34 a.m., 9:48 a.m., 10:02 a.m. From my father. 9:22 a.m., 9:51 a.m., 10:15 a.m. From my father again. 10:47 a.m. And then, finally, a text from my mother. Timestamp 10:52 a.m. Sarah, I'm so sorry. Something has come up. We had to leave this morning. We're heading to the city now. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Please don't hate us. We'll celebrate with you when you get home. I promise. I stood in the courtyard of the university, holding my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, and I felt like I was being split open. Rachel found me a minute later. Sarah, you were amazing. Come take pictures with us. I looked at her bright, happy face, at the parents standing behind her with flowers and smiles. My parents didn't come, I said. It came out flat, the way you'd say it's raining outside. Rachel's face collapsed. What, why? I didn't know, so I did what I'd done my whole life. I made an excuse for them. David needed them, some issue with his soccer league. It's okay, it's fine. But my hands were shaking. I drove home that evening instead of staying for the graduation party. 3 hours on the highway. 3 hours where I replayed my mother's voice saying, wouldn't miss it for the world. 3 hours where I thought about that new dress she'd bought. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was that David's car was there. His expensive car, a BMW that my parents had helped him buy when he graduated and got a job with some marketing firm. I went inside. My mother was in the kitchen. She looked up from the stove and her face crumpled. Oh, honey, baby, I am so sorry. She came toward me like she was going to hug me, and I stepped back. What was the emergency? I asked. She blinked. David. Sweetie, David was in some trouble, financial trouble. He needed us. On my graduation day. I know, God, I know, and I'm sorry. But he was panicking. He called your father in tears and... Where is he? He's upstairs in his room. He's been having a really difficult time, and I want to hear it from him. I found David lying on his bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when I opened the door, and his face went carefully neutral. Hey, he said. What financial trouble? I asked. David sat up. He was wearing an expensive shirt. His hair was styled. He looked fine. He looked better than fine. Sir, I know Mom and Dad explained. They said you were in trouble, that you called Dad in tears, that it was such an emergency they had to leave my graduation. David's jaw tightened. It was a complicated situation. What situation? He looked away. He looked toward the window, at the neighborhood outside, at the safe world our parents had built for him. I lost money, he said finally. I made some bad investments with people you don't want to owe money to. How much money? 40,000. I felt something click inside my chest. $40,000. That's what my parents' contribution toward my college education had been. $42,000 spread across 4 years. They'd explained that very carefully to me. They'd made sure I understood that this was what they could afford, and the rest was up to me. So I'd worked, I'd borrowed, I'd saved every penny from my part-time jobs. And my brother had spent $40,000 on bad investments, and my parents had decided That was more important than being at my graduation. How long have they known? I asked. About a week. A week? Yeah. I think I left the room then. I don't entirely remember. I remember being in my childhood bedroom, looking at the posters of colleges and achievement I'd put up when I was 15. I remember thinking that this was a fork in the road, and that the choice I made in the next few hours would determine what kind of person I became. I could cry, I could scream, I could rage at my parents about the unfairness of it. Or I could be quiet. I could be the sturdy one, the one who didn't require much. I could go along with the lie and pretend this was fine. That night, my mother made my favorite dinner, chicken piccata. My father opened a bottle of wine they'd been saving. We sat around the table, and my mother told me she'd rescheduled the celebration dinner for the following weekend, and we'd go anywhere I wanted, do anything I wanted. As if that could make up for it. As if a dinner out would rebalance the cosmic injustice of being raised in a family where David's crisis mattered more than my triumph. I said thank you. I said it was okay. I said I understood. And I watched my brother eat my mother's cooking, watched him accept their apologies, watched him carry on like someone who had never, in his entire life, experienced a real consequence. That's when I stopped being the kind of person who cries about injustice. I started being the kind of person who documents it. The gaslighting didn't start immediately. It took 3 days. On day 1, my mother kept saying things like, "We're so sorry, honey. We really are. We just hope you can understand how stressful everything has been for David right now." On day 2, my father had pulled me aside and said, "Your mother has been having anxiety attacks about this. Please don't bring it up again. It's not good for her health." By day 3, it was like the graduation had never happened. We went to the celebration dinner at a nice restaurant in the city. My mother wore the dress she'd bought. She toasted me. She told the server it was my graduation, and the server brought complimentary dessert. My father gave me an envelope with a check for $2,000. "For your future," he said. The same $2,000 he'd given to David last Christmas, from what I'd overheard. After dinner, in the car on the way home, my mother said something that changed everything. "I hope you're not going to hold this against us, Sarah. We did the best we could. Family has to come first, and David needed us." That's when I realized something crucial. They had decided that what they did was right. It wasn't something they felt guilty about anymore. It was something they'd already justified in their own minds. My mother had taken her failure to be there for me and turned it into a virtue. She'd failed because she was a good mother, because she prioritized family. I was supposed to understand that being second place in my own family was actually a sign of how much I was loved. It was the most insidious kind of manipulation, because it made me feel crazy for being hurt. Over the next few weeks, everything I said or did was filtered through this new narrative. "You seem distant, Sarah," my mother said one afternoon. "I'm fine," I said. "You're punishing us for the graduation thing, aren't you?" "No, I'm not." "It seems like you are. It seems like you're holding a grudge, and I don't think that's fair, considering everything your father and I have done for you." Everything they'd done for me, college fees, a childhood home, food on the table. All of it was being weaponized against me now, as if loving your child conditionally actually made you a hero. I started to feel, very deeply, that I was the problem, that I was ungrateful, that I was the kind of person who held grudges over small things. But then I'd remember that morning, the text from my mother at 8:33 a.m. before the ceremony started, when she still had time to come, when she had made the choice, consciously and clearly, to stay home instead. And I'd remember that I wasn't crazy. The problem was that I had started to believe I was. 2 weeks after the celebration dinner, David got a job promotion. He'd been working at this marketing firm for only a year, but apparently he'd done something good on some campaign, and now he was going to be a senior account executive. The salary jump was significant. He announced it over dinner, and my parents' response was immediate and effusive. "We always knew you had it in you," my mother said. You're going to do incredible things, my father said. They took him out to lunch to celebrate, just the three of them. I had an internship shift that day, but they didn't even ask if I wanted to reschedule. That evening, I sat in my childhood bedroom. I was still living at home, saving money for the move to Boston where my forensic internship was located, and I opened my laptop. I had always been good at finding information. Forensic science isn't just about DNA and fingerprints. It's about understanding human nature, understanding motivation, understanding how to prove what happened in circumstances where people are lying to protect themselves. I started researching David's company. It took me 3 hours, but I found the lawsuit. Posted on a legal database, a lawsuit filed 14 months ago by a woman named Jessica Chen against David's company, Crescent Marketing Solutions. The lawsuit alleged that David had taken credit for a campaign that Jessica had designed, that he'd presented her work as his own in front of senior management, that the company had promoted him on the basis of work he didn't do. The lawsuit had been settled out of court. Jessica Chen had received a payout, an NDA had been signed. But the court filing was still there, available for anyone who knew where to look. I saved it to a folder on my computer. I didn't know why at the time. I just knew that I needed to hold on to it. The same way I'd learned to hold on to things. The way forensic scientists hold on to evidence. A month later, my mother mentioned in passing that David's girlfriend had left him. Her name was Michelle. They'd been dating for about 8 months. My mother said it very casually, like she was mentioning the weather. She said she wanted different things, my mother explained. She was from a very different background, and I think she and David just weren't compatible in the long run. This was a lie. I found out because I saw David's text messages one afternoon when he left his phone on the kitchen counter. He'd been sleeping with someone else in Michelle's apartment building, the girl downstairs. Michelle had found out, confronted him, and left. In his messages to his friend, David had written, "I don't know why she's being so dramatic. It wasn't even serious." But in the messages to our mother, he'd painted himself as the heartbroken one. And our mother had believed him. That's when I understood something crucial about my family. They didn't want truth. They wanted the story that made David look good. And they wanted me to be the kind of person who went along with that story. The problem was that I was starting to understand something else entirely. I didn't have to. Around this time, I started noticing David more carefully. It wasn't obsessive, it was just interested, the way a scientist is interested in a hypothesis. I watched him in social media. He was on Instagram constantly, posting photos of expensive dinners, of the car, of himself at clubs downtown. I researched his spending. I knew his credit card was tied to our family account, that my father still helped him with bills, that the promotion had sounded impressive until I looked at the actual salary range for that position and realized it was probably 30% less than what he was bragging about. David was performing a life he couldn't actually afford. And my family was reinforcing the performance, because the performance was easier than confronting the reality. In July, my mother asked if I could watch David's apartment while he went on vacation. "He's going to Cancun with some friends," she said. "He asked if you'd stop by every other day, feed his cat, that kind of thing." "Of course," I said. That was when I started taking photographs. His apartment was very clean, suspiciously clean. The kind of clean that suggested he wasn't home much or that he hired someone to keep it that way. His filing system was chaotic, bills everywhere, credit card statements. I found a note from the bank about a late payment. I found a letter from a collections agency about a debt he was disputing. I found, in a drawer in his bedroom, printed emails from Michelle. She'd written to him a month before, explaining very clearly that their relationship was over, that his infidelity had made it impossible for her to trust him, and that she was moving back to New York. He'd printed these out, multiple copies, as if he was planning to do something with them. I photographed everything with my phone. I was careful. I didn't move things. I didn't leave evidence that I'd been there. But I documented it. I created a folder on a private cloud account that my parents didn't know about. I labeled it evidence, and I started building a file on my brother. At the time, I didn't fully understand why I was doing this. I just knew that I needed to hold on to the truth in a family that seemed committed to ignoring it. By August, I could feel the cold distance between my mother and me had turned into something else. Resentment, maybe, or disappointment. "You seem like you're not interested in spending time with us anymore," she said one evening. "I'm around," I said. "You know what I mean. You're quiet. You're always in your room, and I don't feel like you're being very grateful for everything we provide." That word again, grateful. As if love was a debt I needed to repay by pretending to be okay with their choices. "I'm grateful," I said. But I wasn't, not anymore. The final straw came in early September. My father had called a family meeting. This was unusual. We didn't have family meetings. We just existed in the same space and pretended everything was fine. We sat in the living room, my father, my mother, David, and me. "Your mother and I have been talking," my father said, "and we've realized that we want to help David with a down payment on a house." I felt the room tilt. "A house," I said. "Yes, he's been saving and we want to give him a boost. We're thinking $50,000. $50,000. I had just finished paying off my undergraduate student loans. I had borrowed $50,000 and spent 6 years working to pay it back. My parents had not offered me a single dollar toward this debt. But David, who had lost money on bad investments, who had stolen credit for work, who had cheated on his girlfriend and was still receiving financial support from our parents, David was getting a $50,000 gift. "What about my student loans?" I asked. My voice sounded very far away. My father looked uncomfortable. "Well, you chose to take out loans, Sarah. You made that choice. David chose to make bad investments. He chose to lie to his girlfriend. But those choices are fine because they're his choices." My mother stood up. "This isn't about David. This is about your attitude. This is why we didn't come to your graduation, because you make everything about yourself." And there it was. The truth, finally admitted out loud. They hadn't come to my graduation because of me, because I was ungrateful, because I was selfish. The fact that David had called them in tears wasn't the reason. It was the excuse. The real reason was that I had disappointed them somehow, and now they were entitled to punish me. I stood up too. "I'm moving out," I said. "Sarah, I'm moving to Boston next week. My internship starts the week after. I'll find somewhere to live. Don't worry about me." My father said, "You'll always have a home here." But he didn't say it like he meant it. He said it like he was checking a box. That night, I uploaded a backup of all my photographs to a second cloud account. I wrote down the dates and times. I documented everything I'd seen, everything I'd suspected. And I started planning. Not a plan for revenge exactly, just a plan for truth. A plan to make sure that when everything collapsed, and somewhere deep in my bones, I knew it would, I would be ready. I moved to Boston on September 12th. My parents drove me. The car ride was quiet. My mother tried to make small talk. I answered in monosyllables. We didn't cry at goodbye. The apartment I found was small, a studio in a building with 12 other units near the MIT campus. It cost more than I wanted to spend, but I needed distance. I needed space where I couldn't hear my mother's voice in my head, justifying things. My internship at the Massachusetts State Police Forensic Lab was everything my college education had been building toward. I was surrounded by scientists, experts, people who understood that evidence doesn't lie, that the truth can be proven if you're patient enough to look for it. My supervisor was a woman named Dr. Patricia Acaffer. She was 60-something, brilliant, and had been doing forensic science since before I was born. On my third day, she watched me process a trace evidence sample and said, "You have good hands, and you have the right kind of patience." Coming from Patricia, this felt like being knighted. But there was something else happening in my life at the same time. Something quieter. Every night after work, I would sit in my studio apartment and I would go through what I'd collected on my brother. The court filing about Jessica Chen, the photographs of his apartment, the evidence of his financial troubles. And I would add to it. I hired a private investigator. It cost me money I didn't have, nearly $3,000 up front. I told them what I was looking for, proof that David had taken credit for Jessica Chen's work, proof that he was misrepresenting his financial situation to his employer. They came back with more. David's company, Crescent Marketing Solutions, was in trouble, financial trouble. The owner, a man named Richard Brennan, was under investigation by the FBI for tax fraud. David wasn't directly involved, but he'd been taking money from company accounts for personal use. It was embezzlement. The investigator provided me with documentation, bank statements, email chains between David and the company's bookkeeper asking for advances on future paychecks. I paid the investigator the rest of his fee and added everything to my growing file. The thing is, once you start looking at someone, really looking at them, you see everything. I created a spreadsheet. I documented every lie David had told my parents, every time he'd borrowed money and not paid it back, every time he'd represented himself as more successful than he actually was. I subscribed to industry publications. I followed Richard Brennan's fraud case. I set up Google alerts for his name and for David's company. And I waited. In October, my parents called. "We miss you," my mother said. "How is everything?" "Good," I said. "The internship is great. I'm learning a lot." "We're so proud of you." The words felt false, but I didn't call her on it. I was learning that you could let people say things that weren't true and not correct them. You could just let the lie sit in the space between you. "How's David?" I asked. "Oh, he's wonderful. He and some friends are planning a ski trip, and your father says it looks like they might be able to get him that house by next year. Isn't that exciting?" "Very exciting," I said. We didn't talk about the $50,000 again. I didn't ask about my student loans. We had reached an unspoken agreement to pretend I'd never brought them up. Over the next 6 months, I built a meticulous file on my family. I filed a formal complaint with the Massachusetts Bar Association about my father. I did this quietly, through an online form. I alleged that he'd engaged in unethical financial behavior by giving preferential treatment to my brother over his educational obligations to his other child. I didn't say who I was. They had procedures for anonymous complaints. I created a second email account, something untraceable, and sent all of David's financial documents to the HR department of Crescent Marketing Solutions, along with a note explaining that an employee was misappropriating company funds. I kept copies of everything. In March, David's company announced a restructuring. Several employees were let go. The FBI's investigation into Richard Brennan had gone public. There was talk of criminal charges. In April, my mother called, and she was crying. "David has lost his job," she said. "There's been some kind of investigation. Your father is trying to help him hire a lawyer." "That's terrible," I said. I sounded sad. It was a good performance. "We might need to postpone the house down payment." "I'm sorry to hear that." I was not sorry. I was as far from sorry as it's possible to be. In May, I was invited to give a presentation at a forensic science conference. It was a small thing. I was only an intern, but I'd contributed to a study on trace evidence collection in sexual assault cases. My name was in the program, my credentials listed. I was becoming someone, not a reflection of my family, not a supporting character in someone else's story. Just me. Over the summer, I applied for a full-time position at the Massachusetts State Police Forensic Unit. There were dozens of applicants. Dr. Patricia Aucaffer pulled me aside one day and said she was going to recommend me to the hearing committee. "You have what most people never develop," she said. "The ability to be clinical about things that make other people emotional. That's not a bad thing. That's a strength." In August, I got the job. I was making $38,000 a year. I was moving into a bigger apartment, a one-bedroom that cost $200 more a month, and I could afford it. I was going to enroll in a master's program at night. I was going to build a life that was entirely mine. My mother called to congratulate me. She cried. She said she was proud. But I didn't really hear her anymore. I had stopped needing her approval somewhere between April and May. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice the exact moment it shifted. But one day I woke up and I realized that I could look at my mother and feel nothing. Not anger, not hurt, just a kind of clinical observation, like I was looking at a photograph of someone I used to know. David's situation continued to spiral. In September, the lawsuit from the Jessica Chen settlement became public. Apparently, the settlement had been contingent on confidentiality, but when the FBI raided Crescent Marketing Solutions, the documents became discoverable. Jessica gave an interview to a Boston business magazine about what had happened to her. She talked about how David had stolen her work and how the company had paid her off to stay quiet. The article went viral on Twitter. In October, David checked himself into a rehab facility in New Hampshire. My mother called to tell me, and she asked me to be sensitive about it, to not mention it to anyone. I agreed. I also uploaded the article to the file on my cloud account. By late October, I had been collecting evidence for almost exactly 1 year since my graduation. 12 months of photographs and documents, and filed complaints and anonymous tips. 12 months of watching my family's narrative crack open. But I wasn't satisfied yet. I wasn't satisfied because my parents still believed they had done nothing wrong. They still believed that my father's ethical violations were minor, that David's problems were temporary setbacks, that I was the ungrateful child who didn't understand family. And I was learning that understanding was not the same as accepting. So I continued to wait. I continued to build. I continued to become the kind of person who could look at the people who raised her and see them as they actually were. Complicated, flawed, capable of hurting the people they loved without ever admitting it. The real work started in November. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Margaret Sinclair, and she came recommended by Dr. Patricia Aucaffer, who apparently had hired her after a custody dispute with her ex-husband 15 years ago. Margaret was 65, sharp as a blade, and specialized in family litigation and financial disputes. We met in her office in downtown Boston. I brought everything I had. The photographs of David's apartment, the court filings, the evidence of my parents' unequal treatment, the filed complaint against my father, the documentation of the $50,000 gift that had been offered to David but never offered to me. Margaret looked through everything very carefully. She didn't speak. She just read, occasionally making notes. When she was finished, she looked at me over her glasses. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" she asked. That was the question, wasn't it? "I want them to understand," I said. "I want them to know that what they did was wrong." "Legally speaking," Margaret said, "what they did is not actionable. Parents have the right to distribute their resources as they see fit. There's no legal obligation for your mother and mother to." "I don't care about the legal angle," I interrupted. "I care about them being forced to look at what they've done." Margaret set down her pen. "Sarah, I have to ask, are you trying to ruin your family, or are you trying to get an apology?" I thought about this for a long time. "I'm trying to tell the truth," I said. "The truth," Margaret said slowly, "is that your parents prioritized your brother over you. That's painful, but it's not unusual. People often favor one child over another, usually for reasons they don't understand themselves. That doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't. But forcing them to acknowledge it through legal action or public shamming, Sarah, that won't fix what's broken." I looked out her window. Boston was gray and cold in November. "I'm not trying to fix what's broken," I said. "It's been broken for 22 years. I just want them to see it." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. Then let's talk about what we can actually do. Over the next few months, Margaret and I built a case. Not a legal case exactly, but a documentation case, a narrative case. There was the matter of the $50,000 gift to David. Margaret helped me file a request for full documentation of our family's financial history, withdrawals, gifts, loans, from the past 10 years. My father, being an accountant, had kept meticulous records. Margaret's request was technically about a potential inheritance dispute. It was legal. It was also going to expose every financial decision my parents had made. There was the matter of my student loans. Margaret helped me calculate the amount, including interest paid over time, approximately $67,000 that I had personally borrowed and repaid. There was the matter of my father's business. Margaret connected me with a forensic accountant who reviewed my father's books and found exactly what I'd suspected: creative accounting that the Massachusetts Bar Association's Ethics Committee would probably want to examine. There was the matter of David's embezzlement and his stolen work. These things were already public, but Margaret helped me compile them in a way that painted a very clear picture: a young man who had lied, stolen, and misrepresented himself, and who had been protected and financially supported by his parents at every step. We worked slowly and carefully. I was not trying to send David to prison. I was not trying to destroy his life. I was simply trying to make sure that the evidence was collected and organized in such a way that, when it was presented, it would be undeniable. In December, Margaret told me about an opportunity. She had a contact at the Boston Globe, an investigative reporter named Samuel Chen, Jessica Chen's brother, who had followed the Crescent Marketing Solutions scandal and had been trying to write a longer-form piece about corruption in the marketing industry. "He might be interested in your family's story," Margaret said, "not as a personal attack, but as part of a larger narrative about how people cover up lies." "I don't know if I want to do that," I said. "I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying it's an option." But I thought about it. I thought about Jessica Chen, who had had her work stolen and had been paid off to keep quiet. I thought about the people David had lied to. I thought about every other golden child whose parents had taught them that rules didn't apply to them. And I thought about a young woman with good hands and the right kind of patience, whose family had taught her that she didn't matter. "Let me think about it," I said. For Christmas, my parents sent me a check, $500, a card that said "Love, Mom and Dad." I didn't go home for the holidays. I told them I had to work. I was building a new evidence database at the lab and couldn't get away. It was a lie. The truth was that I couldn't sit at their table anymore. I couldn't listen to my mother talk about David's recovery. I couldn't watch my father pretend that his ethics violations hadn't happened. I needed to build the thing that was growing inside me, this cold, clean anger, without contamination. In January, David came to visit me. I wasn't expecting it. He showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, looking rough. He'd lost weight. There were lines under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hey," he said when I opened the door. "Hi," I said. "Can I come in?" I let him in. I made coffee, and we sat on opposite ends of my small couch. "I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. I know I've been a shitty brother, and I'm sorry." This was new. "Okay," I said. "Mom told me you're doing great, that you got that job at the police lab. That's really cool." "Yeah, I really like it." He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. He looked small, breakable. "I'm trying to be better," he said. "I'm in AA now. I'm working with a therapist. I'm trying to understand why I've always been such a fuck-up." And I felt something. For just a moment, I felt the old Sarah, the one who loved him, who wanted to fix him, who believed in redemption. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad you're doing that. I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping we could maybe get coffee sometime. In Boston, and you could tell me about what you're doing. I'd like to understand you better." I looked at him, my brother, this broken, dishonest person who had hurt me more than anyone had ever hurt me, and I said something very carefully true. I need more time. I'm not ready to be close to you again. He nodded. He understood. But what he didn't understand was that time wasn't going to fix this. That I didn't want him to get better. That somewhere in the last 6 months, I'd stopped wanting to repair my relationship with him and started wanting to expose it. After he left, I called Margaret. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's contact the reporter." The reporter's name was Samuel Chen, and he came to meet me in a coffee shop near the lab in February. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, and he had the kind of sharp attention that suggested he spent his life paying very close attention to what people said and didn't say. "My sister told me about you," he said. "She said you had documentation about what happened at Crescent Marketing Solutions." "I do," I said, "but this isn't really about Crescent Marketing. This is about something bigger." I had printed everything out. I had organized it chronologically, with dates and sources clearly labeled. I had created a narrative arc that showed exactly how my family had prioritized my brother's lies over my daughter's truthfulness, how they'd protected him, how they'd gaslighted me into believing I was ungrateful for being hurt. Samuel read through it methodically. When he was finished, he looked at me with something like pity. "This is very comprehensive," he said, "but I need to ask, why are you doing this? These are your parents. This is your brother." "Because nobody should get away with lying," I said, "and because the people who love you are the easiest to lie to." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I can use some of this," he said, "but I need confirmation. I need interviews. I need people willing to go on record." "I'm willing," I said. "That's a good start, but I need more. I need people in your brother's company to confirm what happened. I need your parents to answer questions." My stomach dropped. "They won't," I said. "They'll deny everything." "Maybe, but I need to ask." What happened next happened very fast. Samuel reached out to my parents on a Wednesday. He sent my father an email explaining that he was writing a story about corruption in the marketing industry, and that he'd found evidence suggesting that David had committed embezzlement and plagiarized work. He was offering them a chance to comment. My mother called me that evening, and she was furious. "How could you do this?" she screamed. "How could you talk to reporters about your family?" "I didn't tell him lies," I said calmly. "You told him things that should have stayed private. You betrayed us." "I told him the truth." "The truth?" My mother's voice cracked. "You don't know what the truth is. You're just an angry little girl who couldn't handle not being special, so now you're trying to destroy your family." She hung up. My father called 5 minutes later. "We need to discuss this," he said. His voice was cold. "This reporter needs to be handled. I'm hearing a lawyer." "For what?" I asked. "What are you going to do, sue me for telling the truth?" "You don't know anything," my father said. "You're 22 years old. You don't understand the complexities of business." "I understand that embezzlement is illegal. I understand that plagiarism is wrong. I understand that you've been protecting David while ignoring me." "That's not what's happening." "It is, though," I said, "and everyone is about to know it." He hung up. The story came out on Sunday. It was the cover of the Boston Globe's business section. Building an Empire on Lies, How One Marketing Firm Became a Cautionary Tale. Samuel had written it beautifully. It was a long-form investigation into Crescent Marketing Solutions, into Richard Brennan's fraud, into the culture of dishonesty that had permeated the company. And David was the centerpiece. Specifically, David's theft of Jessica Chen's work, his misrepresentation of his accomplishments, his embezzlement, and most damaging, my side of the story. A sister who had documented all of it, who had been ignored by her family while they protected a lying, cheating sibling. The story included a quote from me. "My family taught me that truth only matters when it's convenient, and that loyalty means protecting people you love no matter what they've done. I learned that the hard way." Samuel had also reached out to my mother for comment. She'd refused. My father had refused. David had refused. So the story was told entirely from my perspective, and it was devastating. David's company issued a statement that they'd already fired him and that they'd reported his actions to law enforcement. My father's firm called an emergency partner meeting. And my mother stopped answering my calls. But here's the thing I didn't anticipate. Here's the part where I learned that revenge, no matter how carefully planned, has consequences you can't predict. David attempted suicide. He took a bottle of sleeping pills on Sunday night, the night the story came out. Our parents found him unconscious on Monday morning. They called an ambulance. He was rushed to the hospital. And I stood in my apartment, reading a text from my mother saying, "Your brother is in ICU because of you." And I realized that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had won. The truth was out. Everyone knew what he'd done. But he was also lying in a hospital bed with stomach pumping, and my mother would never forgive me. And I had to sit with that. For 2 days, I waited to hear if he was going to survive. He did. He woke up on Wednesday morning. He was going to be okay. And when I found out, I cried, not from happiness, but from the weight of what I'd done. I had wanted to expose the truth. I hadn't wanted to kill my brother. I called Margaret. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Sarah, you did nothing wrong. You told the truth. He's in the hospital. That's not your responsibility." But it felt like it was. That was the moment I understood the fundamental truth about revenge. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. It doesn't feel like justice. It just feels like damage. David was released from the hospital on Friday. He had to go to inpatient rehabilitation. My parents had hired a lawyer who was arguing that he needed treatment, not prosecution. And I had to figure out what I'd actually wanted when I started all of this. On Saturday morning, I drove to Connecticut. I didn't call ahead. I just drove the 3 hours to my childhood home, and I knocked on the door. My mother opened it, and when she saw me, her face went carefully blank. "Hello, Sarah. Can I come in? I don't know if that's a good idea right now." "I'm coming in," I said, and I pushed past her. My father was in his office. He looked up from his desk, and his expression was a mirror of my mother's, blank, controlled, distant. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I needed to talk to you both." We sat in the living room where so many family conversations had happened, where my mother had explained to me that I was ungrateful, where my father had told me that David needed their help. "I want to say something," I said, "and I want you to listen without interrupting." My mother and father exchanged a look. "Go ahead," my father said. "I know you believe I betrayed you. I know you think I'm ungrateful and selfish and that I only care about myself. But that's not the truth. The truth is that I spent my entire childhood loving you. I spent it trying to be the kind of daughter who didn't require anything. I watched you love David in a way you never loved me. I watched you protect him, bail him out, make excuses for him, and I kept waiting for you to look at me the same way, like I mattered." My mother opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. "You told me I was punishing you for missing my graduation, but I wasn't. I was grieving. I was grieving the fact that you chose him over me, that you chose his crisis over my achievement. And the worst part was that I had to be the strong one. I had to be the one who understood. I had to be the one who let it go." My father spoke. "Sarah, you know David has struggled. He needed." "I know, you've told me 1,000 times. He needed you. He was lost. He was in trouble. He was suffering. And he was all of those things. But so was I. I was suffering too. And I was 17 years old and I couldn't tell anyone because my family had decided I was the sturdy one, the reliable one, the one who could handle disappointment." My mother was crying now. "I sent David to rehab and I publicly exposed him because I wanted you to finally see me," I said quietly. "I wanted you to finally understand that I was worth protecting too." There was a long silence. "We do love you," my mother said finally. "You know we love you." "I know you do," I said. "But you loved him more. For my whole life, you loved him more. And that fact, just that fact alone, destroyed something in me that I've spent the last year trying to rebuild." My father stood up. "I've consulted with a lawyer about this, about the story, about what you've done. There may be legal ramifications. You defamed your brother, you." "I didn't lie," I said. "Everything in that story is true." "It's a matter of interpretation." "It's not," I interrupted. "It's evidence, it's documentation, it's fact." My father looked at me like I was someone he didn't know. "I think you should leave," he said finally. I stood up. "I have one more thing to say," I told them. "I want you to know that I'm going to testify against David if the DA decides to press charges. I'm going to tell them everything, all the details I've documented, all the money, all the lies." My mother gasped. "And I want you to know that I'm not doing it because I'm angry. I'm doing it because he broke the law and actions have consequences. That's the thing you never taught him, that actions have consequences. You taught him that being loved meant being exempt from them." "Sarah, you can't." "I can, and I will, because the truth matters and because I matter." I walked out. I got in my car and I drove back to Boston. And on the way home, I realized that I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. The Massachusetts District Attorney's Office decided to press charges against David for embezzlement. The charges for plagiarism were trickier. They involved intellectual property disputes, which are civil matters, but the embezzlement was clear. There was a trial. It lasted 2 weeks. I testified for 4 hours. I described the evidence I'd found, the amounts of money, the dates and times. I was clinical and precise. I was exactly the kind of witness that prosecutors love: calm, organized, credible. David was convicted on 2 counts of embezzlement. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. My father was investigated by the Massachusetts Bar Association for ethics violations. He was censured, which is not the worst outcome, but also not nothing. It goes in his professional record. It's a stain. My mother went to therapy. She called me 6 months after the trial and apologized. It was a real apology, not the kind where she also explained her side of things, but a genuine acknowledgement that she had failed me. I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to the anger was exhausting. David served his time. When he got out, he had to register as having a felony conviction. It affects his employment options. He's never going to climb back to where he was, and everyone in Boston's professional circles knows exactly why. And me. I finished my master's degree. I became a forensic scientist full-time. I've worked on 6 high-profile cases. I've testified in court 17 times. I've helped put 6 people in prison. I did all of that not because I was trying to prove something to my family, but because I finally understood what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be the person who finds the evidence, the person who tells the truth, the person who makes sure that when someone lies, there's a record of it. My parents still live in Connecticut. My mother and I talk every other week now. My relationship with my father is cordial but cold. I don't know if he'll ever fully understand what he did to me by choosing David. But here's the thing, I don't need him to understand anymore. That's the real victory. Not that I destroyed my family, not that I exposed my brother, not that I got my revenge, but that I stopped needing anyone's approval to know that I mattered. Epilogue, quiet ending. It's been 3 years since I sent that photograph. That one image, the one that started everything, was a picture of my brother's embezzlement documentation. I didn't send it to destroy him. I sent it because I was done being quiet. I was done protecting people who didn't protect me. I was done being the sturdy daughter who could handle disappointment. I was done waiting for someone to finally see me. The photograph just happened to be the moment everything changed. I look back at who I was before all of this. That girl who believed that loyalty meant overlooking betrayal, that family meant enduring anything, that love meant being second place forever. And I don't recognize her. I don't know if that's growth or if it's just damage that I learned to live with. Maybe it's both. What I know is this: I'm not waiting anymore. I'm not quiet anymore. I'm not the kind of person who accepts being underestimated. And the people who raised me, They learned that the hard way. The hardest way. That's what happens when you spend your whole life building a narrative about someone being strong enough to handle anything. Eventually, they become strong enough to tear down everything you built.